Well, hello there, DevCentral community. It is 12:30 Pacific, and it's Thursday, and it's time for DevCentral Connect's live stream where we get to hang out with all of you, the DevCentral community. I'm John, and this is my good buddy, Jason. How's it going today, my friend?
It is going fantastic. In fact, last night we got a watermelon, and I proceeded to instruct the kids on the proper way to eat one. And I was thinking about like making a whole video of it and sharing it right here at the top. This is how you do watermelon, but I was just enjoying the watermelon. I was too lazy to make that happen. So
nice. This is, you could do a little, this is how we do it kind of thing on watermelon, right?
That's right.
So I love it. Well, just out of pure curiosity, Jason, I will say the proper way to eat a watermelon is without salt. This is my personal opinion, but how does one eat a watermelon? Like what would you instruct your kids to do?
To salt it for sure, because that's the right way.
Blasphemy. That's the unforgivable sin, Jason.
Yeah, remember that those mock you, the more you know, that The Office did, and like Jim's talking, it's like it may be my opinion, but it's true, and that's kind of how I feel about the watermelon. It's like it may be my opinion that salt on the watermelon is the way to go, but it's true.
But it's true. It's the truth. That's awesome, man. Well, it's good times. It's summertime. It's time to eat some watermelon.
And they're actually good right now, right? Because they're in season. Yeah. And so they're not growing in a lab. They're growing actually in the dirt, outside, in the heat, and they taste good.
And that's how it's supposed to be. Exactly.
That's right. Daryl and Boo.
My dudes?
The watermelon was good.
Right. Daryl and Boo, the watermelon is good as long as you don't put salt on it, So that's good stuff. That is good stuff. Well, hey, man, in the spirit of like summertime, you got watermelon and all that. I was talking to this guy earlier this week about like summer travel, and maybe we've had this conversation before, but here's my question. I've always got a question for you every time. I was thinking about the longest distance that you've ever driven in one single sitting, in your life. So What would that be? How long have you gone?
Man, the first one that came to mind was we had left Italy for vacation, and my parents, we flew from like Rome to some Air Force base in Spain, and then down to South Carolina, whatever Air Force base that is, and then we drove, felt like nonstop from South Carolina to St. Louis. And I'm guessing that was 13 or 14 hours in the car, but it's they didn't have minivans back in the early 80s, and so it was me, my brother, my sister in the back seat, and we were in the car so long, just like trying to make a bed out of the floor with the hump in there, and so you're like stacking blankets and suitcases, trying to find some way to be comfortable. And so that's probably the longest.
Impossible.
Or at least it felt like the longest.
Yeah, it's like, man, kids these days, they've got it good. We used to have, when I was growing up, we had one of those like station wagons where the back seat like faced backwards, You remember the wood grain siding and all that? And it was like, oh my goodness, you talk about some like road, like motion sickness stuff. It's like, what is going on? My whole world is backwards, literally right now, Yeah. So it's crazy, man. Yeah, I was thinking about ours. One time we drove from like West Colorado over to St. Louis. Maybe there's something about St. Louis. And it was one of those days. So it was me, my wife, our kids, and I looked down at the GPS. So this was not that many years ago, actually. So this was in the days of GPS. We had the little DVD, system in the car for the kids. So they had it easy, right? But I just remember there was like 4 digits. Like it was over, 1,000, like 1,200 miles or something like that. And we started the day. And I remember like moving GPS, like you're just watching the countdown kind of thing. And it went from 4 digits down to 3 digits. So it went from like 1,000 to 999 miles remaining, And then I was like, we're going to be in the triple digits for a couple of minutes. And we were. And then finally we hit the double digits. And I was like, yes. And but man, that was a long day. So it's but hey,
and Kansas doesn't make it any shorter. Right?
Oh my goodness!
I mean, no offense, Kansas, you're a great state, right? But wow, your beauty along the highway is lacking.
Main Street USA is what they call I-70, right through the heart of Kansas. And yeah, I think you never know where you are in Kansas because it all looks the same, right?
Right.
So,
Yeah. On my journey, it's like for those of you who've never been in the military or never flown on a military aircraft, we flew from Rome to Spain and then Spain to South Carolina in a C-141. And so it wasn't like I was in commercial with the comforts of a nice chair. We were in jump seats with no climate control. And so we're at 30,000 feet or whatever it was. And we're, maybe 38, 39 degrees in the back. And we're all
right.
shaken and wrapped in blankets. So yeah,
Yep.
not the awesomest of trips, but you do what you can to get home and see family.
That's right. That's right. Whatever it takes, right? Yeah. The air's a little cooler up there at 35,000 feet or whatever. So crazy stuff, man. Well, good to go, man. Well, good to go. Well, so, hey, today we've got an awesome show. We've got a couple of fantastic guests, experts in the field. But maybe before that, we've got a couple of shows coming up that maybe we could talk about.
We do.
So next week is Security Sidebar with Rob Roche. And let me tell you something, man. That's going to be amazing. That guy, he is like the brisket king of California, and maybe beyond California. I don't know, but he knows everything there is to know about security. And then he just sprinkles on some brisket barbecue, and I'm like, this guy's amazing. So anyway, we'll talk about some cool security stuff next week. That'll be a whole lot of fun. And then, man, a couple of guys that are like, these guys, people talk about all the automation stuff with Capobianco and Pacheco. I mean, these are like rock star guys in Canada, right?
Well, and their eagerness is infectious, right? They love what automation is doing for their environments and their organizations. And so, really good.
Great attitudes.
And then on the 29th, I'm back here for another episode of You Want Answers.
That's right. I always wonder, Jason, that has question marks and exclamation points. So it's both a question and an exclamation.
It is. Well, I steal that. I steal that from A Few Good Men, when Colonel Nathan R. Jessup is on the stand. Yes. You want the truth. So it's like he's yelling it, but he's also, asking. So
it's an exclamation, but also kind of a question, So
that's right.
Yeah, it's not right. Good to go. Yeah. So, but man, today we've got some awesome time. We're going to talk about the MITRE ATT&CK Framework, which attack has a really cool spelling. There's an ampersand right in the middle of it. Who knew? You're like, I think I know how to spell the word attack. No, you don't. There's a new way. So that's part of the fascination, the intrigue, right?
That's right. So yeah, we've got MITRE's Jamie Williams and our own Sander Vinberg. Let's get him in here.
Yep. Do it.
Gentlemen,
it is for having us. Jamie, man, good to see you today. Thanks for being here with us. Welcome to DevCentral Connects. This is your first time on the live stream. So how's it going today, my friend?
Going well, learning stuff already. I gotta say, I've definitely watched a watermelon video just to know. I don't know if you were taught this as a child, but I'm definitely still under the conspiracy that the seeds will grow in my belly if I swallow them. So definitely some skills to be learned in that tree. And now I'm thinking about brisket on the mind. So definitely a lot circling around here.
I tell you what, maybe we'll talk about the ATT&CK framework. Maybe not. Maybe we'll just have a nice meal together today. Brisket and watermelon. So Jamie, do you do the seedless watermelon when you go for it, or are you still a seeded kind of guy?
I've grown up enough to know it's probably not a venture, like a rabbit hole to go down, but I'm still a little suspicious. I'll eat a seed, but I'm not. I mean, is it commonplace to spit them out? I don't really know. Anytime we're at a picnic and people are looking at you, I'm like, I don't want to fill a cup full of seeds, but I also don't want to end up in the ER later with a root coming out my throat.
I don't want a watermelon growing in my belly. I mean, who wants that? That ruins your day.
That's my title of my autobiography. Yeah.
One Day, the book, the title. I don't want a watermelon growing in my belly.
That sounds like a Shel Silverstein book of poetry about to happen.
That's right. Now you definitely spit the seed out. Like they've got whole like seed spitting contests sometimes, who can spit the seed the farthest.
Okay.
We turn it it's always a competition, right? So
why not? Yeah. When in
that's
Rome.
it, man. That's it. Good to go. Well, Sander, a friend of the show, my friend, how's it going? And thanks for being back.
Thanks for having me. And I got to say, I had no idea that watermelon could be so controversial. You guys are opening my eyes.
Yeah.
Oh, long debate, long heated
Yes.
Argument amongst the friends here on which way is the right way to go. Yeah.
The debate will rage for centuries, Sander. It will go on. And
I
never
don't
be
know.
resolved.
So
Right.
I got to be honest, I've never put salt on a watermelon, right? So I have a half watermelon in my fridge, and part of me thinks I should go find out what it's about, and part of me thinks I'll be like joining sides in a centuries long war. Like maybe I just better stay out of this.
No, I think that as soon as the show's over, you need to run downstairs, put salt on the watermelon, and then you'll be invited back if you're on my side.
You're crossing the Rubicon at that point, though. I've never tried salt as well, but I think sugar is pretty good. I've like sprinkled like lightly. It may be a little bit of overkill with sugar on a fruit, but things to kind of mess with your lunch, I guess.
There you go.
That's right. That's
So
right.
yesterday for the first time, I was at the grocery store and I saw something called a Hopa banana. Have you guys ever heard of this?
No.
Hopa.
It's like this thick. It's like a mega banana. It's like shorter than a regular banana and extremely like thicker than a beer can. And it is just like a banana. Like you peel it and you cut it up and you eat it like normal. It's just huge. And it was totally new to me. I just ate it this morning and that was my new fruit experience for the day. So I think I'll wait tomorrow to salt my watermelon. But I wanted to put this on you guys' radar. If you see any enormously thick bananas, check it out. It's not so
Okay. So it was a good experience then, Sander, like positive. Okay.
Definitely would recommend it. I think Hopa is
Hopa.
How has this
I
ever
didn't-
come up at like ice cream parlors and stuff? That's like perfect for a banana split.
Right.
I know. I was like, where has this banana been all my life? Like, I've never heard of this thing in my life, and it was just at the local co-op grocery store in Mount Vernon, Washington. And it was a surprise. So,
And were they like real
you have it.
nonchalant about it, as if this is like a normal thing, or was it like a bunch of signs like, oh geez, like,
it was like they were playing it cool. It was pretty cool.
Okay.
But it was also next to one of those fruits. Oh man, there's like this whole category of fruits that I cannot. Every time I'm like, is that a quince or is that a? And what was this thing called? There was some kind of weird. So maybe it was a little bit in like the strange fruit that doesn't grow around here kind of section. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, that's definitely one of those I've never seen this before section for me, So that's awesome. Hey, Sander, I wanted to ask you also, Hopa bananas. There you go. Way to go, man.
Someone behind the scenes has got our back.
Pasilva is always
Pasilva?
on top of it. Yep.
Hey, if you need something, man, Pasilva, Hopa bananas. I love it. Sander, super quick, man. I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about your brewing, your microbrewery in your house. And last time we talked, I think was it that you froze something? So we're talking about like beer slushies or something like that, or maybe not, or maybe you had to throw out like a whole batch or something. So anyway, how's that whole world going real quick? Maybe
I think we're about to get a live demo. Yeah.
yeah. So
Nope.
Sander,
Hey,
you
he's
coming
having some
through
audio
okay?
issues. So
Maybe okay. At first, I thought it's like he can't even speak because he's so focused on what he's going to say for his answer. But now I'm wondering if now we got He took the headphones off. He's going to put the salt on the watermelon, Jason. So dang.
All right, well, we can
All
ask about his beer adventures when he comes back
later.
In the meantime, we can actually get started at 15 minutes in now about what we actually, Jamie, you're here to talk about with us. So bottom line, to kick this off, what is the MITRE ATT&CK Framework?
So MITRE ATT&CK Framework is going to be a knowledge base of adversary behavior. So, long story short, and I can go in a lot of the background and more details as we progress. I don't want to steal my own thunder here, but We use ATTCK to model what real world threats and actors are doing operationally. So, exactly as you said, John, about fruit that, we're not used to, using intelligence to actually, not just direct the way that we think about cyber adversaries, and all the decisions that, kind of cascade down from that, but making sure that we look at, adversaries could do anything in our environment. They could try to steal our data. They could try to, encrypt our data and hold it ransom. There's a lot of kind of those results. But, what happens in between an adversary, deciding that they want to target you and that end state? So we use ATTCK to model those behaviors so that, not only that we can understand, what adversaries are doing, but we can connect those to what are we going to do about it in terms of, every data point in that timeline probably has potentially a corresponding defensive countermeasure. So, initial access. So let's think about, how adversaries get in our environment, the different ways we can get into our environment and actually make good decisions on, this is how we would defend this. This is how we would detect that. So, it's a long way of just, thinking, long way of just saying, it's really just a lens and a way to kind of look at our adversaries, decompose them, and start to make, iterative chunk by chunk progress to actually being better defenders.
I tell you what, that's fascinating to me. So I guess one of the things I think about, as you look at, hey, these are the ways that attackers are doing things, and so you need to understand that as a defender, if you will, so that you can know how to defend what they're doing, right? One of the things that I was curious about is, from the MITRE perspective, when you guys put all of this data together, do you tend to grab like just publicly accessible information, or you guys work with some of these companies that have been attacked to gather the data, or how does some of that work?
Yeah, so you're spot on there. Where as MITRE, we are curating all this intelligence. We're not telling the community this is the thing that you need to focus on. Us producing our own intelligence. We're really just taking the open source threat intelligence that's already available and just putting it into a model for it's easier to understand, more actionable, and then serving it back. So to exactly your point, we do a lot of just, Googling, to be completely honest. We know a couple places where, we get a pretty constant stream of threat intelligence, and we're able to use that to, bolster the model and grow. But also, we do, ATTCK is free and globally accessible. There's no paywall. So I think someone dropped the link in the chat. You go there, you get what you get. It's all there. And that said, that opens up a lot of collaboration opportunities where, people see things that could be improved. They see things that are missing, and they're able to send it to us, and we can actually, kind of be that, that broadcast, that loudspeaker saying, such and such organization, wherever they are in the world, has experienced this. As long as it fits our philosophical model of it is a real world action used by an adversary, not necessarily, we watch Black Hat and DEF CON talks too, awesome tradecraft, but what you'll quickly see is that what a real adversary does versus what's possible, there's a little bit of a delta there. So we like to think of ourselves as kind of that loudspeaker in terms of, let's model things in a way that's actually, helpful for practitioners. But, say someone gets a trace of something that adversaries are doing in one little corner of the world, we can actually publish that to everyone so they can learn from that, include it in the way they think about defenses. But also, it's funny, it's like the snowball effect. One person comes up and says something, hey, we saw an adversary do this. And then before you know it, 9 other people saw it and they're just not talking about it. I think that's one of the biggest challenge we're trying to address is, not only the willingness to share information, but defining a common language where, the way you describe an adversary doing something and the way I would may differ, but we can build some kind of like common taxonomy where we can communicate back and forth very directly. There's exponential gains to be had there.
I mean, if I could just follow on that,
absolutely.
I have spoken to a handful in the last 6 months, a handful of different university classes on security, or like folks coming into the field. And a lot of folks ask me kind of, where do you go for security news? Where do you go to get a sense of what's going on? And increasingly, I'm telling people, just start at the attack site, because this isn't its primary function, but it sort of functions as a news aggregator for threat intel, right? And so it's like, so if you want to know about a specific technique, and then you go to procedures and you say, okay, who's doing that? And it'll tell you, oh, Fin6 or Cozy Bear, whatever threat actor, this threat actor is known to use this kind of procedure. And then they have all the citations. So I don't have to go to 20 different sites and find 20 different write-ups, because the way that the framework is structured, it also ends up being, for my purposes, a security intelligence aggregator. So just such a big fan of it.
I love what you said there too about start. It's a starting point. Like attack is definitely not going to be a silver bullet for solving your problems. But like you said, it is fantastic, like starting point in terms of aggregated data intelligence, but also what we really are trying to, tease out. And I love the work you did, and I guess we'll get into that a little later, but it's not just the data that's available there, but it's the way of looking at the problem, saying, exactly as you said, like, we see people try to answer those questions on, how do I defend myself against a Fen 6? How do I defend myself against a Cozy Bear? That's not an actionable question to ask. And if you're not asking the right question, you're not going to get the right answer. So really, what is a Cozy Bear? Well, Cozy Bear is, a group. You're not necessarily going to defend yourself against a group. So you keep unpacking that to campaigns, and eventually we reach that TTP level where it's, hey, in this instance of Cozy Bear, doing an operation, this is kind of what they did in terms of, a tangible subset of behaviors. I can actually, from that point, start to pinpoint, specific data points and saying, well, this, the way they did initial access, we don't have a chance there, not something I can defend. But the way they did execution, the way they did lateral movement, I got something there. I can actually, tactically respond to that. So you're not necessarily, it does take a little bit of massaging and a little bit of, interesting skill sets in terms of taking something, nebulous and kind of breaking it down. But that is, from our experience, I'm not going to toot our own horn. That's been that approach that actually gets us to, cyber operational victories, whether, however you measure that and whatever your field is. Attack isn't going to be something that's just for, a certain group of people. It's, red teamers, blue teamers, analysts, reverse engineers, people in the management chain, people doing procurement, whoever has some touch and involvement in security can definitely benefit from this process and this kind of mindset of our adversaries. It's not 100% true, but thinking about our adversaries in terms of just, they're a collection of actions that they do in our environment that, will yield a corresponding response that we can actually maybe leverage and exploit to not get hosed as much as we do.
Yeah, that's really cool. And there was an in the article that Debbie wrote, she had Peter shared that here, the kind of looking at the attack. She had a graphic where, you talked about working your way through the TTP, the tactics, techniques, and procedures. I got that right? Is that right? Yeah.
Yep, got it.
And it was almost like like if you're a fan of chess and you've ever studied famous chess matches, you see kind of move by move how they work through the game, and you see their opening, the middle game, and the end game. And she had a graphic where she's kind of drawing, okay, they started here, worked through this, but then it bounced over to here, and they're crossing disciplines across horizontally, but working their way through the tactics and different stacks differently. And for me, it's I think it's helpful to study those kinds of things as you look at particular attacks, to actually look at the game. How did they progress through their initial access and all the way to whatever their end goal was for that?
Exactly. And it's not just looking at the game from, say John and I sat down and played a match. I could graph that out and say well, he did this and he did this. But then looking at the game from the aggregate and saying, 1,000 breaches, 100 actors, however, let's aggregate all this data and see, well, this seems to be a move, even if it seems insignificant, this one little move seems to happen all the time. So in terms of a world of limited resources, that might be a place that might seem like a very odd place to try to defend myself, but that will happen. Versus this squirrely thing that sounds awesome, a bunch of talks about it, it's all over the news. We've seen one actor do that. Maybe not something the yield there might not be as profitable. So and that's kind of like I said, that big philosophy that we try to teach is that threat informed defense. Every decision that we make in security, measuring that's hard. So why don't we, to our best of our abilities, let's let our adversaries and let our threats tell us how to make decisions. And we can do that by tracking what they do, because I don't know who you are, but at least from my perspective, that's the easiest way to actually talk to them. There might be better ways, but it's kind of beyond my influence there.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I love the way, Jamie, that you said that this framework has given all the people in our industry a common place to come, a common language to speak, as it were. And I got to think that's a big nut to crack, as it were, a big, puzzle to solve in and of itself, to give people a common place to come, a common language to speak, to say, this is how we're going to share with each other, So I think that in and of itself is pretty fantastic,
Yeah, and that's like you said, that was one of the biggest. I don't know, I wasn't there, like the attack elders when they initially wrote this stuff down, but I think that was one of the big aha moments was, exactly, funny story. I can walk this back a little bit from a third party outside, but, most times, people are kind of see models and they're like, well, it's interesting to learn it. And like, what's the point in like kind of diving in? Because, attack itself has a huge learning curve. It's not necessarily something that you're just going to like intuitively pick up. It's not like, 1 + 1 = 2. So that's, to me, like anytime you look at a model or any type of framework, you really have to look at it and say like, well, what does it solve for me? Like what problem am I trying to solve? And attack, I think, is addressing exactly what you said. It's, attack's roots are from cyber war games. We had red teamers and blue teamers in the environment. They were going at it and they were trying to develop analytics and say, let's figure out how many behaviors that we can, test and develop analytics for. And the root problem was they couldn't talk to each other. Like the red team would, share some command line they ran or some tool jargon and like, oh, we did this through like, blah, blah tool. And the blue teamers were like, I don't know what that means. I can write an analytic for hashes. I can write an analytic for strings. That's probably not what we want to do. So they kind of whittled away and they realized, well, why don't we talk about the behaviors? Why don't we think about like what the red team actually did? And like, I don't really care how they did it. I just need to like conceptualize, like, they did remote discovery of a system. They did lateral movement via a remote service, like actually talk about it at that level of abstraction. And then some genius was like, yeah, we should like use that same term and those TIDs that we define in attack to actually like cement those, 7-8 years later. Now we see like, analytic engines and everyone's tagging things with these TIDs. And it's like, wow, I don't think they had that, in mind when they started making a spreadsheet of adversary behaviors, but, I think we've all benefited. So I personally am a big fan, nothing but grateful.
Yeah.
I think the cleverest move that they made was, there's always this thing. I run into this all the time. I'm talking with people about how to communicate about security, how to communicate about attack behaviors. And there's always this kind of judgment call, be like, am I going to try to create a taxonomy here? Or am I going to leave this as an unstructured thing? Right. And it's like, they're both important. There's a lot of advantages you get from a taxonomy, but it's really easy to go down into, you spend your entire time being a taxonomist, right? And then you end up arguing, does this really belong here? Does it really belong there, right? And it's like, I've had so many conversations where it's like, oh God, we're gonna have to create a taxonomy, aren't we? There's no way around it. But now and so what I like about attack is that it does have this kind of hierarchy and taxonomy, but from tactics to techniques, from techniques to procedures, but it's a flexible one, right? It's a many-to-many relationship. Techniques can show up in different tactics. You can sort of slice and dice in different ways. So what I feel like you get is a really, really flexible model that still has a lot of depth, right? So it's like you can make it work for whatever you need to do. You can capture reality the way you need to, and you don't have to become this sort of like butterfly collector style of analyst. You know what I mean? So that was like when I realized that, I was like, this is amazing. This is powerful.
That's spot on. Cause like exactly as you said, like we've seen those frameworks, we've seen those standards, and we do a lot of work to make sure attack is pragmatic and for a practitioner. Like you said, if I throw some big fancy language and ivory tower academic like perspective on things, that's not going to help you. It's fun to talk about, and it's fun to kind of flex your intellectual wit. But it's like this needs to be something that something people can actually use and actually make value of. So I definitely appreciate that feedback, as well as that's something we're constantly keeping in the back of our mind. Attack is huge now. And it's like the bigger it is, the harder it is to use. So one of the biggest lessons, like you said earlier, was that we've kind of preached to people is there's a lot of data there. It's not an all or not thing. It's not a standard. It's not like you have to use it all. Just poke around a little bit, dip a toe in, see what makes sense to you, start using it. And the more you use it, it's like riding a bike. It's like, you get your first bike. It's simple. You start doing on some rides. Now you're installing gears and different chains and your own custom seat. Like you'll kind of grow into it the more you use it, but it's not something where it's like, I feel like I hate when people kind approach it like a compliance thing, where it's like you're either are you using attack and that's going to be a solution to anything, or it somehow makes you better at cyber because you've sprinkled some attack on your stuff.
It's the pixie dust, Jamie.
That's right. Just to go back real quick about commonality, I think that's true not just of security, but I think that's true of like anything you're focusing on. It's like the more common we can make the nomenclature, the more approachable it's going to be, especially for new technologists who are coming in. Because if you look, whether it's security and its attack framework that can look overwhelming, at least with a common nomenclature, people are going to be able to talk to anybody, and they're going to be able to come to a place of knowledge pretty quick. In the DevOps world, if you look at the that cloud native ecosystem chart that they have, and it's like 1,000 and 1,500 different products and like 48 different micro segments of the market, and you're like, for newbies, how do they even get started? And I think that's a challenge to growing the industry and getting us to a more mature place. And so I appreciate that about things like the attack framework, where we're trying to get to hey, let's all talk about it this way.
Yep. And that's what I loved about Sanders' work there was, we need that language. We need a common way of talking about things. But conceptually, if you understand the language, you can create new words. Where, looking at what he did with the diagrams, I was like, oh, there's certain things in this diagram that we wouldn't classify as an adversary behavior. But in the story he's trying to tell, I agree with those words. Like, I think you introduced like unknown. Like, I don't know what happened right here in terms of this timeline, but that makes complete contextual sense. And I think there was a couple other you introduced that were fascinating. It was like error and like, misconfiguration. And like, we wouldn't call those like adversary behaviors, but I'm like, in terms of this story that you're trying to outline, like you're inventing your own, attack-like words. And that's exactly the point where, attack, like we said, is going to be based on publicly available intelligence. We know these CTI vendors don't publish everything they see. They can't. And they publish, freely what we're kind of basing our stuff on, things they can share widely, things they want to share widely, because they're, it's, kind of an element of marketing. They're showing, people this and that. So we know like each organization has different priorities. They have their own insights, their own perspective. They have intelligence that we will never see. So that, like, really the big thing is like understand the language, understand, as Sandra said earlier, that starting point. And from there, the adventure is yours. Just choose your own adventure. Just kind of, philosophically, we've kind of like, outlined something like a yellow brick road. But where that goes is based on your use case and kind of what makes most sense to you.
Yeah, it's fascinating. So, hey, Sandra, I wanted to give you a quick second, too, on the framework. I know you, doing F5 Labs research and a lot of security, background, all that stuff. You've used the framework, right, on some of your research. So I'm just fascinated to know, like, how did you use it, and like how did it turn out? Some of that kind of stuff.
The first thing I should say is it took me a couple tries to get into it. Like Jamie said, It has a learning curve. And the first time somebody showed it to me, it was not long after I joined the research team I'm on now. And I was looking at it, and the first misinterpretation I made was that the tactics always go from left to right, which I have since spoken to a lot of people, and that's their initial assumption too. And so the first thing I say is understand the relationship between tactics and techniques, because otherwise you're kind of not going to get off the ground. And the second thing I say is, just like Debbie pointed out in that article, in reality, you can bounce around from tactic to tactic all over the chart, right? And those behaviors will be dictated by what the attacker's trying to do and what the environment looks like that they're moving in. Once I figured that out, then what I did was I spent about a month. This was at the beginning of this year when I was starting to collect the data from these publicly sourced data breach notifications. And I started running through the data breach analysis framework that I used before I got into attack. And then I started sort of walking myself through, okay, if I was going to decompose this into multiple stages and tactics and techniques, what would I do here? And it was pretty different from your standard threat intelligence analysis project, because there's tons of unknowns, right? So it's like if all I know from a ransomware breach notification is that somebody broke in and then they deployed ransomware and then they exfiltrated some stuff first, then I have to sort of work backwards and reconstruct what I can sort of reasonably conclude about that. And then from there, it just took lots and lots of times of like looking at the techniques. Sometimes I would pull in other people on my research team and say, hey, what do you think about this? How would you characterize this? Would you characterize this as, exfiltration over a web service, the use of external remote services, like how, and we, and the MITRE folks are quite explicit about that this is not always going to be a crystal clear judgment call, that that different analysts will produce different outcomes for the same threat intel. And so, it's an impressionistic thing. And especially the way that I did it, I kind of bent the model. I was working with partial data. So everything I do, and I'm quite explicit about that in the report, it's like data impressionism, right? You were doing this to sketch out a big picture, not necessarily to get into how you structure a single WAF rule or something. But so, yeah, it definitely took a lot of time reading and a lot of time kind of following up and saying, okay, when these folks are talking about this sort of thing, what are the examples, right? Because the attack framework is, and I think that this is one of its strengths, it is pretty abstract, right? Like there are a lot of folks who have been working in security for a really long time who would describe an attack and they wouldn't use any of this terminology. They would use more specific stuff, right? Instead of saying external remote services, they would say SSH. They're brute forcing my SSH, right? There is no SSH value in attack. So you have to kind of process this other way of thinking about it. And it's all about, for me, it's all about this relationship between what did they do and why did they do it? And when you start thinking like that, be like, well, the SSH was how, that was the procedure, but kind of what do they do and how does that ladder up to their goal of getting into the environment or whatever? The more you work in it, the more comfortable you get. And so it got to the point where at the end, I had memorized all the TIDs for all the events that were in my data model, and I could go pretty fast. But there were definitely weeks at a time where my boss was like, hey, how's that going? And I was like, really slow, really slow. And I was racing the clock at the end a little bit, but it just got over the line. And I'm pretty pleased with what came out. And I had a lot of help from a lot of folks. But this is kind of the model that I had always wished I'd had before. So it worked out great.
I love that analogy too, because like you said, that's kind of the exact like principle we're targeting. Is like you said, you can play whack-a-mole and like, all these different things, and you're as a defender, you're just like trying to hit all these little like gophers poking their head up. Or you can say like conceptually that whole side of the board is the same thing. And if I I can defend it at a higher level than, trying to hit each little hole in the ground. That's So these use cases are phenomenal in terms of, that's our biggest fear on our side, is that we're losing touch with, it being usable. So the more we can see, I read your report and I was like, I love this, because not only did you work really well with what was there, but everything you added, I was like, I see why you added it, and given everything that you did, I would have done the same thing. Cool.
That's great, because I got to be honest, when I was doing it, you are the first person from MITRE that I've ever spoken to, and you sort of like think of MITRE as this. I don't know. For one thing, it's like over on the
MITRE Corporation.
Yeah, it's like the MITRE Corporation, and it's like a bunch of like government or government adjacent people. They're all like ex-DOD, and I was like, oh man, these folks, if they ever see what I did here, they're gonna come out and murder me. But it's actually the opposite. I'm really pleased to hear that.
How dare you slander our framework with your nonsense? Because
because I'm collecting public data breach information, and a lot of folks want to know, like you said, there's a lot of accidents in the data. There's a lot of human errors. There's a lot of folks emailing the wrong attachment. I do it. It's like, oops, I don't often do it with sensitive information, but, I'll email the wrong spreadsheet to someone. And so one of the questions that we want to kind of help people understand is look, if you view this not from the prior that we're talking about web attacks, but we're talking about data loss, breaches, how many of those are actually malicious adversarial actions versus just people making mistakes? And that, for our audience, that's a significant finding right there, because if you're spending $1 billion a year trying to stop the GRU or the SVR from Russia, but your folks are emailing sensitive information out, you're not prioritizing, right? So we bent it a little bit, and I'm aware that there are like huge gaps. One of the both good things and bad things about using this framework is it really, really made it quite transparent to everybody how little I'm able to reconstruct of these attack chains. So I had to sort of lay all my cards out on the table and be like, I don't know. But Yeah, I think it worked really well. We were looking forward to making this a standard annual research process in our team so that we're going to continue to produce these things and compare them year on year.
I think you touched on an interesting point too, is like, since attack is going to be based on all historic, publicly available intelligence, you're really looking in the past. It's very like this has already happened. This is, and attack is published online. Adversaries can read their own pages. I'm sure if I was a known notorious hacker group, I would like bookmark my page and like, I'm going to see what they're talking about, because
that'd be awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. But that said, it's like, exactly as you pointed out, it's like, attack is not really necessarily going to push you to, not only categorize and understand the what, but I love what you're talking about, the why. It's like, okay, like, why do they do this? Well, their objective was to move laterally in your environment. And that's kind of where you start to touch on that future predictions, where it's like, hey, like, say in your environment, you did all that, you mentioned SSH. You looked at remote services and you said, okay, let's lock down host-to-host communications. We've done a good job, either hardening that or, firing detections there. You can start to almost think about like that how might have disappeared for an adversary, but that like why is still there. And they're going to have, say they get into your environment, they're still going to have that need. So you can start to think, okay, well, what else would they do? What are the other techniques here? What are the unknown, well, we call them unknown techniques, but what are the things that just aren't in attack that, are potentially here that, adversaries, that's why we love, what we do, because it's like you see the same adversary do two different campaigns. And exactly as you said, there is no linear, like they did this tactic and this tactic and this tactic. It's a lot of, capability based improv. So it's super fascinating from our side. Yeah.
Yeah. A while ago, I was talking with some of the F5 security researchers based in Tel Aviv who are very much more tactically oriented than I am. They're the folks that are like capturing attack traffic, analyzing the payloads, that sort of stuff. And they had collected a bunch of research about the human CAPTCHA solver folks, where there are organizations that use APIs to like farm out CAPTCHAs to human workers in developing countries, and then they get you the code back. And they were like, hey, we have all this research about this stuff. It doesn't really fit in our brief. What do you want to do with this? And I was looking at everything they collected, and it took me a while to sort of figure out that this is actually sort of telling us something kind of awesome and obvious, but it's hidden from plain sight, which is that there have this CAPTCHAs and this entire industry that is about computer vision and telling humans from bots and all this other stuff. And it's like, the bots were never really the point for the attackers. Scalability was the point of the attackers, right? And so it's like if you put in a CAPTCHA and you'd be like, oh, we're going to make this about human computer vision, attackers are like, fine, I'll just go find somebody that'll do it for a quarter of a cent, And so defenders are like, let's make this about AI. Let's make this about the bots. And the attackers are like, that's fine. It was never really about the bots. It was about abusing your web services or whatever it is. And that was like kind of when I realized that was when I started thinking a lot more explicitly about why and not just how. I don't know about you guys, but I've sat through a million exploit demos where the demo happens and I'm like, okay, when's the demo starting? And all the really, really experienced, like more like red team hacker guys are like, that was amazing. And I'm like, I don't understand the context of which is, like, I'm sure it was an amazing exploit, but I wouldn't know because I just saw a command, like I saw a command prompt flash up for 2 seconds and disappears. Like maybe there's a shell there. So this, in any case, this whole sort of thing about the relationship between what people do and why they do it, I think it's really common in our field to get fixated on the how and the micro details, the techniques and the procedures. And I think if we can all start thinking a little bit more about why do they do things the way they do, because a lot of times they do it because we've closed off all the other paths. And if we close off this path, they're going to find another path. That's the whole game. That's the arms race. So what I hope is that, because it seems to me, I don't know, Jamie, you should tell me if you disagree, but I feel like this framework is kind of exploding in popularity right now. I'm not the only researcher who's using this thing. And every week I see more and more folks move into this framework. So hopefully this whole perspective is going to become more common. That's what I'm crossing fingers for.
Can confirm. Like I said, we've seen a lot of not only great adoption, but great contributions. People, like you said, like, I didn't necessarily, I don't think I saw anything in yours, in your breakdown that was like, oh wow, we should add this. Like, it's not something we've accounted for. But now that you're kind of, in the initiated, I think you kind of have that nose for like, ooh, this is something that like kind of fits that philosophical like structure. And us just kind of constantly reeling that information in is contributing both to, exactly as you said, like kind of the widespread kind of collective knowledge, leveling up or evolution, but also someone who understands attack, your write up, the readability and how much like impact of that just substantially increases. Because it's like you said, it's like I can understand like that chart. Someone who might not understand what's going on here, that chart might be like, I kind of see the flows, pretty colors, awesome. But like, there's such a different lens that kind of hits when you're like, like you said, you're looking at like TTPs and you're like, okay, like this all makes just like, it crystallizes so much more. And, I think that's the biggest kind of shared goal that we all have is, we're not just doing this for fun. We could just pass information and pass notes all day, and that's fantastic. We're actually just trying to, make substantial improvements. And I think it's, it's one good decision at a time. And how can we push that?
Well, I think some of the popularity might be to, abstraction is hard. That's a hard thing for a lot of people. It does not come naturally to me at all. I mean, an example, it's like you can give me a hammer and you can give me a nail and you can tell me to nail that hammer into a board and I do that. But like to abstract it, saying what I'm actually doing is I'm fusing two pieces of wood so that they remain connected. That coming to that might take me an hour of, okay, I've hammered this. And you ask me again and again, what have you done? And it's like, well, I took a nail and I hammered it into the board. But to get to the actual conceptual I fused two pieces of wood. I mean, that doesn't come naturally to me at all. And I think that's true of a lot of people. So having that kind of abstraction to the what from the how is super important. Exactly. Because like you said, it's every time you come across two pieces of wood connected, could be a nail, could be a screw, could be Gorilla Glue, rubber cement. It's like, as a defender, like you said, as soon as you can come to that realization, you're like, I don't want like Super Saiyan, you eat your little Mario mushroom, like whatever analogy you want to go with, but you're going to be pretty dangerous in terms of, your capability there. Yeah.
Hey, so I got a quick question, Jamie, on this framework. You look at all this publicly accessible information and what attackers are doing, and just everything we've talked about is fascinating stuff. I'm curious if anything has kind of emerged out of this lately that has shown any kind of interesting, pattern or things that we just didn't quite think about before. Maybe we need to think about these things instead, or, and part of that, just really quick, is, we hear the very common, make sure you change your password every 30 days, use a strong password, or, credential stuffing this, and, patch your systems that, whatever. And it seems to always be the same stuff over and over, which, there's validity in that. Anyway, I'm just curious if there's anything kind of novel that it's like, oh, we didn't quite see that or whatever. So,
couple answers to that. Unfortunately, I wish I can give you one crystal clear answer. The first one would be like you said, there's all these like cyber hygiene best practices where like, use complex passwords and use like, change your password every once in a while and account lockouts. But I think what attack really highlights is exactly as we were discussing, like why. And you're like, the gravity of it is not just like, oh, because NIST or whoever told me to do so. It's like, well, if you don't do this, this is what, like, I can show you on a matrix view. This is what's going to happen to you potentially if you don't do these things. And you can kind of see in the bigger picture of an operation, here's kind of like, the paddling you'll get said you not actually, listen to these instructions. The other big two, I would say would be, first being old dogs, new tricks. We see all the time where like, we a threat group or an actor or a piece of malware that we kind of, as an industry track, we'll see it like, iterations and evolutions over time where fundamentally a lot of the things that they're doing are very similar. It's just, you can watch it evolve over time, or like, exactly as to Jason's example, like in the past they were, nailing wood together. Now they're using, some infrared, super sneaky glue no one's heard of. And you're like, oh man, like that's like really slick. But really, like, if you understand connecting two pieces of wood together, you're like, oh yeah, like we could have defended that a long time ago. We just didn't like you said abstract it to the right level. We had we had a metal detector looking for nails, and they 3D printed nail and got around it. But conceptually, if I see two pieces of wood stuck together, that's something that should trigger something. But kind of, if I had to give, I'm kind of going backwards here, like third place, second place.
Good.
My first place answer would really be exactly as Sandra said earlier. Like, very often, cyber is such a fast moving, industry. There's information all over the place. We're constantly flooded with those headlines of, X actor did this, X, Y malware did that. And it's really easier to be enamored with like the so what. You're like, oh, Fin6 got in my environment and stole $100 million. APT29 came in and stole all my emails. And you think that's what you need to defend when, attack, every technique is there and we kind of, bake those out. But, I don't think they're all created equal. There's some that are more impactful. There are some that are more devastating. There are some that I personally, depending on what network I'm in, I don't care about this. Like an adversary could do this. Good for them. My users do it all the time too. I'm not necessarily going to waste any time defending this. And I think that's kind of the big, aha moment is exactly as we're talking about. It's like, a lot of if you look at the matrix, a lot of what we're talking about in terms of the headlines are going to be kind of what we typically render on the right side, where it's like, data encrypted for impact or exfiltration of this. And it's like, well, those events are really, if you mapped out everything we knew about it, have a lot of stuff to the left, both, in terms of the matrix, but also temporally. So exactly, kind of one of the big conclusions of, I think, a lot of we talked about today is, being a good at cyber defense isn't just looking at those, like a particular subset of techniques. It's really an understanding of every data point, like the bigger picture, but also understanding, not just, being aware of all those data points, but being able to like consciously decide, like, this is what I'm good at defending. And even if I'm not good at defending other things, I am at least aware of them. I understand, hey, we have a hole here. I'm not defending it particularly, but, say initial access via USB drives or something. It's like, that's not something I have the cycles nor the means to address, but this is what follow-on techniques may look like. And this is where I need to kind of lay my eggs in those baskets, because I unfortunately can't address a precursor there. So, like I said, we're always, anytime we see reports and we see something we'd classify as a new technique, we get like really giddy because we're like, oh, we get to like add a new sub technique or technique. The model gets bigger, but at the same time, it kind of, it's kind of almost like a conveyor belt where that jumps into that bigger picture of, so what? Like what happens before this? What happens after this? And like I said, those are all the questions that are hard, but those are the answers that lead you to the right place.
Fascinating.
Yep. Sorry, I had a comment here. The so what factor is important, especially when convincing management on spend and priorities. Yeah.
Yes, it's critical.
Yeah.
Well,
that is. I think as a sort of a way to bridge the communication gap between management and analysts in the SOC, I think that this has a lot of potential as well. And that has kind of historically always been kind of like it's not impossible. And like the best CISOs, the best directors of security keep their toes in the details as well. But a lot of people want to look at security spending the way that they look at marketing spending and the way they look at other things. And I would argue that I don't think that that's the best way to think about security spending, but that's how people do it, whether I like it or not. Right. And so I think that's really, really powerful.
Some of the best feedback we've gotten about ATTCK in terms of, exactly as you said, like the CISO level engagement has been ATTCK enables you to quickly make pictures. And, management loves a pretty picture. So I can tell an amazing story with a single slide, because I can throw a matrix on there and highlight, we spent $10 million and this is what we did. Or, here's, I'm asking for $5 and here's what it's actually going to do. I need to hire someone and this is why. There's just so much inside, ATTCK isn't going to be that tool that saves you. It's going to be that thing in your back pocket that gets you to the finish line. So yeah, like I said, I don't want to keep tooting the hole in there, but keep asking those what's and whys. I'm loving the feedback we're getting here.
Yeah. Well, it's a horn worth tooting, I would say.
Yeah, exactly.
We did have a question here from Arnaud. Do you think all SIEMs should standardize their use cases according to MITRE?
Good question. I'm never going to tell you that, like I said before, attack isn't a standard. I'm not going to tell you it's attack or bust. I think conceptually, exactly as Sander highlighted, if not attack, doing something similar for whatever you're doing, I think it's not going to be like, I'm not going to promise, you'll get venture capital funding and everything will work out. I think it's a good idea. I think it's a fantastic idea because, not even attack is going to be in itself scoped to particular domains. Like we're very much focused on, things that would happen in a traditional enterprise environment. So things like Mac, Linux, Windows, some mobile stuff, some ICS. But to exactly my point, we've seen people build attack-like models for domains that we haven't touched, things like disinformation or like other types of systems where we just we don't have the public intel to build that, but that philosophy of I need a common way to talk about the tactics, techniques, and procedures of my adversary or whoever I'm trying to model. I think that is you never fall short of the benefit of doing that. So whether it's attack or not, not an answer I can really give you without understanding the problem. And I think, like I said before, really the benefit of a model is the problem it's trying to solve.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and I think you're talking about vendors or whatever. Comes back to commonality. If we're all talking about the same thing, customers are going to have a clear understanding of what you do. And we talked to Mario Platt back during RSA week about the DIE model, and it's like trying to understand based on the 30-second elevator pitch companies give where in the matrix that product actually lives. And we went through exercise after exercise, and we were all over the place. So it's like that commonality, I think, would go a long way to solving some of that problem, whether it's attack or something else.
And that's the beauty of it too, because you can get that initial read from, like, say you get a sales pitch or whatever, and you get them to sit down with their sales engineers, walk through, map it to something like attack or kind of a quantifiable thing that I can measure. And then say you deploy it in day one, you can do that same measurement and say, well, this is what you sold me, this is what we did. And then maybe 100 days later, 200 days later, years later, progress that over time. Because, one of the biggest things about attack is going to be that common language. But the second, big benefit is going to be quantifying things. Cyber is just not something that you can count. So we need to define these weird currencies so that we can kind of see like where we are, where we need to be, where we goofed, et cetera, et cetera. And, attack is going to be that for behaviors, but you could conceptually do this for whatever you want to do. So we've seen MITRE produce other matrices. We've seen outside organizations produce their own matrices, but it's that same philosophical, exactly as you said. I just need something. I need some like Lego pieces. I don't care what they're labeled as. I just need little things data points that I can track.
Absolutely. Well, we're up against time, guys, and I want to be respectful of your time. So, Sander, a parting thought before we go, and then Jamie will let you close that out.
Yeah, one of the things I've been thinking about ever since I published this report a couple months ago now is producing this report has shifted my own attention way more heavily towards network intrusion, lateral movement, and persistence. And what I don't know is how much of that is down to using the model and looking at things as attack chains instead of saying, oh, this was a web exploit, and just leaving out all the other stuff. So I don't know if this kind of emphasis in my own research is down to the model or if it's down to the growth in ransomware. Because for the last several years, the attacks that have been making the biggest waves against like cyber criminal kind of actions, leaving aside nation state actors and espionage for a moment, because that's a kind of a different ball of wax, right? When we focus on cybercrime, we've tended to actually see really short attack chains kind of come to the fore. It's basically like web exploits for skimming credit card numbers or credential stuffing for web fraud. And everything else is kind of like just filling up the numbers. And then all of a sudden now we're seeing ransomware, and to get ransomware, you need a dropper. And a lot of the times they're dropping 3 or 4 different pieces of malware to accomplish really specific things. And so all of a sudden my perspective is like, to me, it feels like I'm sort of focusing on network intrusion in the way that I did 10, 15 years ago when I first got into this field. And so, like I said, I don't know how much of that is the model and how much of that is just historical change driving a new perspective. But that's like really where we're going to be focusing on in the next couple of months is network intrusion back? Was it ever gone? We're not really sure. What does this kind of mean for prioritization? So Yeah, that's my parting thought.
All right, Jamie, thank you so much for joining us. It's been awesome. If you were to leave the community with any thoughts about Attack, what would you say?
Obviously first thank you for having me. I would say, like I said earlier, get to know it, take a look, make it your own. It's not an all or bust thing. It's, it's your model. It's yours, it's ours. And don't be afraid of sending stuff back. Cause if you have a good idea, I'm sure other people will benefit from it. So definitely reach out if you see anything that could be improved or added. And thanks again for having me. It's fantastic.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Awesome. Well, thanks guys for joining us. We didn't even get to all your pretty pictures. Both of you guys had and I'm a caveman. I love pictures, and we didn't get to the pictures, so I'm really sad about that. Maybe we'll have to come back and do that someday. But appreciate both of you guys.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, guys. Take care. Awesome, man. Well, Jason, what a great show, man. Hey, yeah. I wanted to give a little shout out really quick too. This came in a few minutes ago, but Techie Diraj. I hope I'm saying that right.
Yeah.
Cool to work at F5. 2 years today. Well, hey, wow. Congratulations. That's awesome, man. It's great to see Techie Diraj. Well, good stuff.
I know you're not going to throw it up there, but I will. I'll brag on you. He's like, I really enjoyed John's sessions. So obviously, no love for me. It's okay. It's fine. But
all the love. Yeah, all the love to Jason. Yeah, except for your questionable, decisions on salt and watermelon and that whole thing. Not to bring that back up. But anyway.
That's right.
Awesome. What a great show, man. Really appreciate Jamie and Sander and just kind of understanding. I mean, that is, I've looked at the ATTCK framework, and it's like they said. I mean, the first time you look at that, it's like, where do I even start? Right. So it's kind of awesome just to kind of get their analysis of that and what it is, and don't feel bad if you don't understand it all on day one, right?
That's right. Yeah. And even Sanders, like, I don't even know where to begin, but it's like, that's where you rally around the people who have been there and reach out to them. This is a community after all, right? So we're all here to help each other. And
that's right.
That's why we're here today. That's why we're here every Thursday at 12:30 Pacific is to be community and help each other out. So
yeah, good stuff.
And you're back next week, right?
Back next week. That's right. With Rob Roche. It's going to be amazing. So
that's right.
Yeah, good stuff.
All right. Well, we're at the end again. Thank you, community, for joining us on this ride. And we'll see you, or John will see you, next Thursday, 12:30 Pacific. Have a good one.